There is something in us that makes us attracted to the idea of being able to travel through time. In 1895, H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine. He is credited with creating the word and creating the concept, basically, of time travel. Since then, this book has been adapted into several radio programs, comic books, films, and television shows. And the book has inspired many more works of fiction. It seems like every television series has, at some point in it, a time travel episode. What is it about time travel, though, that attracts us? What is it that makes us want to travel through time? Why would we ever want to travel through time in the first place? And I think there are a couple of obvious answers. The first is a personal answer, there's a lot of things back there I'd like to go back and fix. There's a lot of things back there that I regret, that I'd like to change, that I'd like to make different decisions and do things differently than I did them. So I think that's one of those attractions that we all have, that we want to go back and fix whatever mistakes we may have made. Because movies are fiction, they can show us not only the good things that happen with time travel, but also the bad. The movie The Butterfly Effect expanded on the idea that one little change in the past can cause a ripple resulting in momentous change in the future. The result can be completely unintended and sometimes not desirable at all. But time travel isn't just about going backwards, it's also about going forward in time. Going forward in time would allow us to pick the Super Bowl winner, would allow us to pick Microsoft stock way back when it wasn't worth a whole lot. Wouldn't it be great to be able to look into the future and know what was coming around the corner, even if it was only 1 year in the future? Well, today we can do that. We can look 1 year in the future. I can take you to 2015 right here, right now, through the power of the movies. Back in 1985, our more modern version of time travel debuted on the big screen, and that was a time machine created with a DeLorean. DeLorean sports car powered by a flux capacitor. I think we all may remember that. Michael J. Fox played Marty McFly in Back to the Future. So where did this idea of this film come from originally? I looked into the history of the movie, and it started with two writers talking with each other. And they were talking about their parents. And one of the writers says, I wonder if I had gone back, went back in time, would I ended up being as good friends with your father as I am with you? Because we share traits of our parents. And he was thinking, would I have been friends with your father? And as they're saying that, well, that's a great idea for a movie. What if we could go back in time? And that's where Back to the Future came from. The first movie went back in time to 1955, but the sequel in 1989 actually went forward to what year? 2015. So let's see a couple of minutes of what 2000. I watched this and I knew right away this is exactly how 2015 is going to appear.
You can thrust your car to the system with the star. Check the oil. Check the landing gear.
Shark still looks fake.
Into a Skyway flyer for only $39,999.95. Come on down, see me, Goldie Wilson III, any one of our 29 convenient locations. Any keep a flying.
2050, that was exactly like next year's going to be, isn't it? Predicted in 1989 as to what 2015. There were a few things in there, though, that they did get right. Interesting prediction of 2015. The premise of Back to the Future is that everything we do affects the future. Every step we take, every job decision, every life change, everything plays a role in what our future will look like. When Marty McFly goes back to 1955, he accidentally becomes the romantic interest of his future mother. If you remember the plot of that original film, Marty realizes what could happen. There would be no Marty McFly, so he has to find a way to get his future parents to fall in love. So what if we had the chance to go back in time and reflect on the path we have taken in our lives? What if we could go forward in time and prepare ourselves for whatever might be around that next corner? Everything we do affects this moment in time, but also changes our future. In addition, it changes the future of those around us. Our decisions are not made in a vacuum. When we decide to leave a bar on a Saturday night, a little tipsy, and get behind the wheel, that decision is not a decision in a vacuum. It suddenly is a decision that affects anyone who is on the road at that hour of the night. That is why the decisions we make are of such importance. Over the years, I've looked for ways to get across or at least remember what I need to do thinking about the future. And one of these I found a few years ago was an acrostic that I like, and it spells out the word life, L-I-F-E. And each of those letters stands for one of those things that we can do when it comes to looking back to the past, but also to the future. And the first one is for learn. When looking to the future, we learn from the past and we move forward. In Proverbs 11:2 it says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Humility. Humility is so important. And when it comes to learning, humility is extremely important because we learn when we're humble enough to realize we messed up and we need to learn from our mistakes. In my own life, growth has happened when I have made mistakes and learned from them. Do I wish I could go back in time and change those mistakes? Of course. But God has used those mistakes and turned them into valuable opportunities for growth in my life. One of the things that I try to hold to is that I will never make the same mistake again. So if I'm going to make a mistake, it's going to be a brand new one. No, I'm totally creative. I'm going to be very creative in my mistakes. I will not repeat the same thing that I did before all over again, or at least I will try not to with God's help. That's part of moving forward. When we learn from our mistakes and move forward. Paul understood this as he explained how he had made mistakes but learned and moved forward. The Apostle Paul speaking in Philippians 3:13, "Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it." He's saying, I haven't figured it all out yet. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. Paul could easily have looked at his past and felt that he could never be the person God called him to be. Instead, he kept moving forward. Paul's life was originally devoted to destroying Christians. He was a student of Gamaliel, who was the top Pharisee teacher, called the Pharisee of the Pharisees. And part of what he learned was that Christians had to be stopped. Paul was a top student and devoted his life to tracking down and persecuting believers. Had Paul continued in this direction, he was on the way to becoming a high priest or a rabbi. His life would have been set. He would have had prestige, power, and wealth. But on the road to Damascus, Paul's life was changed forever. But Paul still had to live with the person that he was. How could he be the person he wanted to be with his past hanging over him? I suspect if you asked him, he would have loved a time machine. Take me back and let me change what I did. In his letter to the Philippians, he explained how he dealt with his past. And I'm using the paraphrase from Eugene Peterson in The Message. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this. But I've got my eye on the goal where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running and I'm not turning back. Learn from your past. Don't live in your past. But I think there's another step, and it sort of comes into focus when you think about Back to Church Sunday. Involve yourself in a group of believers. I hear it so often, I don't have to be a part of a church to believe in God. Well, you're right, you really don't. You do not have to be part of a church. I will be honest with you, I have plenty of reasons to tell you not to be part of a church. I've had enough things happen in my life that I think churches can be pretty awful when it comes down to it. I've had enough things happen to me. I've watched as pastors behaved in ways that were inappropriate. I've seen so many things that go against every tenet of Christianity in churches. So I completely understand where you're coming from. And I have friends who say they will never set foot in church. In fact, we've had a couple of people here who have been here who never will set foot in what they consider a church building. They have no problem coming here, but in a church building, but it's because of the past that's built up over time. All of those things and all of the things that they have seen, and even the things they've seen in my own life, and they've said, how can you still believe in church? And yet, I'm here. Despite everything, I still believe that the church is a powerful, living, and breathing organism. When I weigh the relationships, the joy and growth I have found in the church to the things the church has done wrong, there is no comparison. I believe that without the church, I'm stifling an important part of what it means for me to be a believer. Paul felt the same way. Hebrews 10:23, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. We are here to worship and praise God, but we're also called here to encourage each other, to lift each other up, and to discipline each other. That's part of being a part of a church too, if done in the right way. Learn. Involve yourself in a church and focus on Jesus. Paul describes our focus on Jesus as fixing our eyes on Jesus. I love that phrase, fixing your eyes on Jesus. Why? Because when our eyes are on the goal, we are focused on our task and everything else falls to the wayside. Hebrews 12:1 and 2, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. I love that. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured on the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We're in football season, and before it is over, you will see this typical scene that drives coaches crazy. A player breaks a tackle and begins running. He runs toward the end zone and he's just flying and you know he's going to make it, and then he does something. He turns around and he looks back. And in that instant of turning around, he does one of a couple things. He either trips on his own feet or the runner behind him uses that opportunity to catch up, grab him by his shirt tail and pull him down. Drives coaches crazy because he took his eyes off the prize. He took his eyes off the goal. We're supposed to fix our eyes on Jesus, just as a football player is supposed to fix his eyes on the end zone. I believe that Michigan football players are very good at fixing their eyes on the sidelines. They seem to run side to side and can't run forward. There's a problem there. You don't score a lot of points when that happens. You never score touchdowns when that happens. The same thing is true of our faith. It takes effort to keep our eyes on the goal and keep moving forward. It's easy to slide around back and forth and never get ourselves focused on where we're supposed to be, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Instead, we have our eyes fixed elsewhere. Well, what do I look like? What do I sound like? Am I focused on my job? Am I focused on school? Or do I have my eyes focused on Christ and all that I do? Because everything else will flow into that when we have our eyes on God. We see those pursuers after us and we lose sight of the goal. We see our mistakes, we see our sin, we see our failures, instead of focusing on the future and on fixing our eyes on Jesus. This is the very heart of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We have to have a single focus, and that focus is the only standard of comparison we should be using. Notice the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. The pioneer and perfecter of our faith. He is the example set before us, and that's where our eyes should be. Learn from our mistakes. Learn from our past. Involve ourselves in a body that lifts us up. Focus. And my favorite, this is my favorite of all, expect great things. Jeremiah 29, 11 to 13 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." I have a promise from God that gives me hope for the future. God has a plan for each of us, and when I submit myself to God, when I trust in Him, He has promised to be faithful. How do I know this? Because if I went back to the future and tried to mess around with the mistakes I've made, I wouldn't have the family I have today. It was something I was thinking about the other night as I was working on the message this morning. The mistakes I have made have actually resulted in the fact that I have Bryce and Riley and Kerrigan and Dawson. Because the mistakes I made set me on a different path. God guided me back to where He wanted me to be, put me back in His will, and as a result, I met Karen. And as a result, I have a wonderful family. God can use our failures for His glory. We may not think about that right now when you're in the midst of your trials and tribulations, but He is always there, and He's waiting for us to come into His arms and trust Him. Only trust Him, says the song. Only trust Him. It's hard to do, though. Learn from your past. Don't live in it. Involve yourself in a body of believers. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Keep the focus on Him and expect great things. When we trust in God, we can expect great things. God is going to do amazing things, but we have to turn our eyes toward Him. Learn, involve, focus, expect. That's what life is all about. And then, when that happens, we don't have to worry about going back to the future.